We'll wait for a few people. How are you doing today? I realize I sent you all these messages and didn't ask that, and that's so rude of me.
Oh, fine.
If the weather's just so nice, I would have a hard time believing anybody was having a bad day. But
yeah, no,
I know there's some people who are.
Well, Kimmy warmed the goats, and I helped her.
It was so exciting.
Wormed the goats?
Yeah, so you gotta like basically body wrestle them to hold still and then slam some wormer paste in their mouth. When do you go look at that farm?
I'll tell you more about that later.
Oh, is there more? Is it good or bad?
I'll tell you more later. We're live now.
Oh. Live.
If anyone's watching, please leave a comment. I know that we have at least one viewer. That's probably you, but still. All right. Well, somebody's watching. Leave a comment. We are live on this great program that we kind of fell into last week because we had issues with our other program. This one has, we are actually streaming live on both Facebook and YouTube. So we are going to start hopefully inviting some more viewers who don't use Facebook to join in and check it out. And that'll be a little bit easier if you want to send that out in your newsletter as well.
Can you do that?
I'll be able to send you a YouTube link soon, and I can schedule things a little bit ahead of time. But hello, everyone joining us. Again, if you'd like to leave a comment for Ms.Baker, you are welcome to, or a question. And I'll be asking questions at the end. But she is here with us live today. This is Liz. This disembodied voice is Liz from Capricos Books. We're a small independent bookstore in downtown Bel Air, Maryland. But we are, yay, Amy's joining us. Woohoo! If you want, Ms. Baker can say her name if you want to leave a comment. We can shout out her name because I know people love that. But leave that in the comments because I'm sorry I don't remember that off the top of my head. But thanks for joining us, Amy. And but I was saying we do have Ms. Baker's books signed. So they are available on our website, which is www.capricosbooks.com. And if it's not something I have in stock, reach out and let me know, and either I'll order it for you, or I will try to find you a copy one way or the other, and we will get it signed. The other thing is if you already have copies of a book that you've read growing up or just read recently and you would like a signature plate, I do have book plates that are signed. So just leave me a shout out. So I will, oh, that's fantastic. All right, so I am going to go ahead and bring on, first I will bring on Ms. Baker. If I can remember how to do all that. There we go. So I always feel like it's like, yay, hello. And I'm going to put up this comment for you so you can give a shout out to Abigail.
Hi, Abigail. Welcome.
Yay. She is an 8-year-old who loves your books. Oh, and Magic Animal Rescue is one of her favorites. So this is the 4th one in the series, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and we've read all the other 3 are behind in the image behind, but yes. They are we've read each of those. So if you want to go back and watch them, they are on our YouTube channel, or in their previous in the event, you'll see the previous live videos. So she's read a chapter from each of those.
Actually, 2 chapters from these.
2 chapters, yes, because they're quick. I was saying digestible books.
Indeed. All right, you ready?
All right, take it away.
This is Magic Animal Rescue, Maggie and the Flying Pigs. Chapter 1. Maggie laughed when one piglet tripped over another, and they both tumbled across the floor. Although Maggie always enjoyed helping out in Bob's stable, she especially loved taking care of the flying pig and her babies. Still chuckling, Maggie dumped the bucket of grain into the mother pig's feed pan. "What's so funny?" Leonard asked the talking horse. Leonard, the talking horse, asked from the next stall. "The piglets are so cute," Maggie told him. "I love the little sounds they make." "Huh," he grunted. "That's one thing I could do without. Those cute little sounds keep me awake half the night." Maggie no longer thought it was unusual to have a conversation with a talking horse, but then she was used to a lot of unusual things happening at the stable where her friend Bob the stableman took care of rare and magical creatures. Here's Maggie with the piglets playing. Maggie had been helping Bob with the stable chores for a few weeks now. Bob and his wife Nora had taken Maggie in when her stepmother, Zelia, had kicked her out of the family cottage. Maggie loved her new family and thought it was a big improvement over her stepmother and step-siblings. She missed her father every day, though. She wondered what he would do when he came home from chopping wood on the other side of the enchanted forest and found that his daughter was gone. The mother pig lurched to her feet and ambled to her feed pan. Maggie hurried out of the way. The pig's wings looked a little tattered. Her babies must have been chewing on them again. After stepping out of the stall and latching the door behind her, Maggie sat down on a bale of hay. Reaching into her pocket, she took out the brand-new journal that Bob had given her and opened it to one of the pages she started. She read over what she'd already noted. This is the journal with a section about the flying pigs.
Oh, that's so cute.
Flying pigs. Temperament. A mother flying pig can be very grumpy. Stay out of her way. Never get between the mother pig and her babies or her food. Piglets. Baby flying piglets are very cute. They start running around 15 minutes after they are born. At first, their wings are just little stubs covered in fuzz. Maggie took out her pencil and started to add to the page. Once they get teeth, flying piglets like to chew on their mother's wings. If she doesn't tuck her wings out of the way, her babies can chew holes in them. Sometimes the piglets tug so hard that the mother nips at them. Do not try to stop them, or she might nip you. Here it is again. Someday I'll get used to this. That's the wingtip. Chapter 2. Maggie knew she shouldn't touch the piglets when their mother, Carmelita, was watching, but one baby was lying on its back, wedged in the corner of the stall, kicking the air with its little trotters. The piglet looked as if it was stuck. She couldn't just leave it there. Moving slowly so she didn't startle the pigs, Maggie walked around the edge of the stall and reached for the baby. When Carmelita snorted and lurched to her feet, Maggie turned the baby so it could get up and started running to the stall door. She could hear the mother pig charging after her. With only seconds to spare, Maggie threw herself at the half door, grabbing the top with both hands. Heaving herself up and over, Maggie felt the sow's teeth graze her shoe. The door shook as the mother pig crashed into it. "What are you doing?" Leonard asked. He was a regular horse, except for the fact that he could talk. "It sounds as if you're trying to knock down the stable." "I was just helping a piglet," Maggie said, inspecting her shoe. "If you made Carmelita mad, I suggest you shut the top door, too," said Leonard. "She is a flying pig, remember?" Maggie gasped and turned around. She hadn't seen the sow fly lately and had forgotten that she could fly. Maggie heard the whish of beating wings and slammed the top half of the door shut. She had scarcely latched it when the sow crashed into it again. The angry squeals were loud enough to make Maggie cover her ears. "Keep in mind that there are no ordinary animals here," Leonard reminded her. "Says the talking horse," Maggie said with a laugh. Leonard snorted and peered over his stall door. "I must say you've been busy today. I don't think I've ever seen this barn look so clean." Maggie shrugged. "I didn't do that much. I just cleaned the stalls like I usually do, and washed the water buckets, and swept out all the nooks and crannies, and knocked down spider webs, and brushed me and Randall," Leonard reminded her. "Thanks for that, by the way. I know I feel a lot better, and Randall does too. The old unicorn has never looked so good. He really likes that you polished his horn." "I'm glad," Maggie said. Randall was the only unicorn who had a permanent home in the stable. Years before, Bob had found him caught in a trap with his leg horribly mangled. Bob had brought him home, but the unicorn's leg was so badly injured that it had to be replaced with a peg leg made out of wood. The unicorn loved Maggie, who always went out of her way to make him more comfortable. "The sheriff stopped by," Bob said as he walked into the stable. "I was just telling him what a hard worker you are, Maggie." Here's Bob walking into the stable. Maggie's stepmother, Zelia, had kicked Maggie out of the family cottage a few weeks before. Ever since then, Maggie had lived with Bob and his wife, Nora. She loved the elderly couple as much as if they were her own family and was always happy to help out. Still, three things worried her even from her safe new home. When would her father return from cutting wood on the far side of the enchanted forest? What would happen with her stepmother when he did? And what would her obnoxious stepbrother, Peter, do next? Carmelita squealed and banged into her door so hard that the entire wall shook. "What's wrong with her?" asked Bob. "Maggie helped one of her piglets," explained Leonard. Maggie nodded. "The baby was stuck and couldn't get up." Carmelita is mad because she wasn't able to take a chunk out of Maggie, Leonard finished. I'm not surprised, said Bob. The sow's been going a little stir-crazy lately. I think I should take her outside and let her stretch her wings. Aren't you afraid she might fly off? Maggie asked. Not with her babies here. I've tended mother flying pigs before. She'll come back in a few hours and be in a much better mood. Stay out of sight while I take her outside, Maggie. She's mad at you now, but she won't be by the time she gets back. You can brush me some more, Leonard told Maggie. There's an itchy spot on my back that really needs it. Maggie groaned, but smiled and looked for the brush. That was the end of chapter 2.
I always forget to unmute myself. I mute myself while you're reading so you don't hear the noise.
Oh.
And then I got to remember to unmute myself. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And I know that we kind of met the pigs in the beginning of the previous book a little bit too, because I remember hearing a little bit about them flying around. So it was good to hear a little bit more about their story and see them in her journal. So I know I had sent to you some of these questions ahead of time, but I'm going to say I have a third grader, and they're working on informational text. And I know that is pretty different from fictional writing, but I thought some of the questions that they were asked this week by their teacher were still pretty good that they could apply to this. So they're learning about writing something down and then learning to elaborate on that. So my first question that might help some other third graders or aspiring writers out there is, do you do all your writing? Do you I know you write much longer books than they do. Obviously, they're just writing like 3-paragraph things. But do you do all your writing at once? Do you just get an idea and that's when you write? What's your process a little bit?
Oh, goodness. Well, I do a lot of, I call it PreWriting, where I write down, I create characters. This is not at all the informational thing you're talking about.
No, but it's okay. It's still information. You gather information and you write down you outline, and that's still very important.
Right. I create characters. I do timelines. Not always, but if it's a book with a lot going on, I will do timelines. I do maps, and I do outlines. And the outline, I tried doing the Frog Princess I wrote without an outline, but after that I did everything with outlines. With an outline, I start with a very general overall picture of the story, and then I take it down to more detail, and I do a number of outlines. And then finally I do it detailed enough that I break it down into chapters. And I always cut and paste to put what I have for the chapter at the beginning when I'm starting a chapter, so I can look back and say, oh yeah, I need to go with that. After I have the story down, the first draft, I go through it again and reread it and tweak what doesn't feel right. Sometimes it's sort of like I've written it, so it's like a skeleton of a story, and then I go in and fill it in, and that might help with the informational things.
Yeah.
So like if I haven't really filled out a character as much as I want to, I do that. I make a list of all the things every character should have at least 2 quirks. Every story should have more than one thing going on. Like there's the overall plot where the story is about something larger happening, but then there's the underlying plot where somehow the character is changing or developing. So you have to have layers in your stories. So when you're revising, you want to make sure you have all the layers in and that they make sense. The first time you revise, you make sure that everything makes sense.
Yeah. And it's honestly, I admit I asked the question a lot about outlining just because I'm teaching her. Obviously now we're all homeschooling. So we're trying to learn how these things are going. And I'm very much a person who likes to outline and likes to, just like you, we are very similar, many layers of outlining and more detail. And I need to think that in a pyramid style almost. And I don't think my daughter thinks that way. So we're clashing a little bit there because she just wants to write and get it out. And that's kind of how her teacher is teaching her, which is great too. It's just a basic way to do it. And so I'm always curious how authors do that. And then you kind of already addressed a little bit the question, but let me ask, actually my other question is, do do you write every day, or do you write when the mood strikes you, or do you have a what is that, a limit of what you have to write every day? I think I might have asked you this before, but
Yeah, I used to have a limit. I used to write at least 5 pages a day. Sometimes it was 10. But with the pandemic, life is sort of different. And I write generally 3, maybe 4 hours a day. Some of that, I take my manuscript. I work on my computer during the day, and then I print out what I've written, and I take it to bed with me, and I edit it, and I might just start the next thing that's coming up the next day, start working on that, or I just make notes to myself, or I write part of the dialogue or a new scene or setting or something. And then the next day I sit down at my computer and I put all that into my story, the things that I've worked on the night before. So it can be 3 or 4 hours at my computer and then more at night. So I quite often stay up very late because the house is quiet and I get a lot more done.
yes, I admit I've become a night owl. I go back and forth in life. Sometimes I like mornings, but now with this whole thing, I'll be up until, for me, midnight is really late. But if we all make it to midnight and then trying to get up in the morning. I have one other question that I'll come back to, but first I want to add our fun little special guest in here, Addison, who is the sweet girl, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, who came to visit us
Hi,
back
Addison.
when we were open. I'm so excited. I'm so glad
Yes.
she's here. It was so sweet to have you. We really enjoyed your visit.
You did. Really.
So hello.
Hi.
And we also, here's sorry, I'm gonna hop around since there's questions in the galley now. Which other of your books would you recommend for an almost 8-year-old second grader who has devoured all of the Magic Animal Rescue series? She's a pretty strong reader, but still young, so it's hard to know which is good for her, but not too mature. I'm going to jump in and I will say absolutely. I think that More Than a Princess is great for that. That's that next level information, but there's nothing in there that is questionable.
Yeah, no, I don't think any of my books have questionable things in them. At least not so far.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think, you've got your Matchmaker series, which might be a little more mature if they don't. I know some kids don't really like the romance aspect of it, but even then, I don't consider it's nothing, nothing too bad going on. It's not why I wouldn't even call it young adult in the terms that young adult is now used.
The Matchmaker is just fun. I
Yes.
think.
They're exactly sweet, very sweet, and I love that you have written across all these ages, and they are graduated, so to speak. So yes, and so Addison says, "A day I will never forget." Thank you.
I'm so glad.
So, and if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments and we'll come back to them. So my last question was, again, since they're my third graders talking about informational text, and what they're working on now is revising. And I know that you've just had to do major revisions, and I can't remember if we talked about it or not before on one of these lives, but you've done some major revisions. So you're not unfamiliar with revising things.
Well, revising is very important. And I know people who say, they don't like revising, or people who I belonged to a writing group once, and there was a young woman who was in the group and could not stand anybody criticizing her story or making helpful suggestions or anything, and she would cry, and that makes you not want to help. One thing, you need to have somebody else, and I mentioned this before, you need to have somebody else whose opinion you value, read your story, and they'll see things that you haven't noticed just because you're so used, what's supposed to be there, and it isn't necessarily, you might leave out some words or something and not notice it. So you need to have somebody else critique. All right. What was the general question again?
Oh yeah, no, and it's interesting because just what you just mentioned actually comes up very often when I speak to any writers about revision. They talk about having someone else proofread too, so that you can step away a little bit, but also I think you bring up a good point about during revisions that it's important to also accept that criticism and be open to hearing someone else's criticism of your work. So
when you criticize somebody else's work, when you critique it, you always start with something you like about it. You don't want to say, oh, I hated this. No, you start out and say, I really like this about your story. And then you can get into the things that you had problems with. Hopefully you didn't hate anything, but there might be things that you thought, didn't sound right. And when I send mine, my agent reads my work first. I send it to her and she reads it and she looks for bigger picture things. Like, does the plot make sense? Is this character true to self? That kind of thing. And then the next round, she's looking at more details until we get down to the point where it goes to the copy editor, and the copy editor just looks at grammar and punctuation and all the nitty-gritty of writing. So there's a lot of layers with revisions too.
Yeah. And so kind of combining the two questions or points that you made, you outline in several layers. And I'm going to, not that I think that this works, I'm kind of trying to broaden the answer. Again, I know you don't write informational text, but thinking about informational text, just because that's in my life right now, having it outline, you start with your basic, so, for example, my daughter is writing about coral right now and the habitat of coral. So her first outline could be something as simple as coral is alive. And now they have to go back in and add detail. So I like what you said a lot about saying how each character has to have quirks. And to me, that's in their informational text writing, they're talking about adding detail so that they're beefing up their writing. And so there's that good way of limiting yourself to not go overboard and saying like, I want this character to have all these traits, or I want to say coral is purple and yellow and blue and orange. You can just say it's colorful. So that's a really good thing that I'll be able to take back to my daughter and teach her. Just kind of limit what you want to describe, but also describe it in more detail than just saying it's hard.
Right. Well, when you're creating a character, or you're talking about your coral, you're going to do some backstory and write everything you can think of that you want this character to embody, everything that this character is. Like for a character, instead of coral, what kind of books do they read? What kind of food do they like? What do they wear? Where do they go? Do they like a sport? Do they like certain music? All of that. Write it all down on your list when you're creating your character. And then think of the most important things in that. You're going to know all this stuff about this person, but you're not going to put that all in the book because then it would just be boring and drive everybody crazy and nobody would want to read it. So you think of the most important things, the things most relevant to the story, the things that will show up in the story you're telling, that need to show up.
Yeah.
So
that's great information.
What are the most important things about coral?
Yeah.
This is alive. Does it move? How do you know it's alive? What proves that it's alive?
And their teacher actually has them doing where it's basically they have to start a new sheet. They ask a question per sheet and then fill in everything on that sheet, and then they're going to go back and use that. So it's an outline that I wouldn't think of using, but it sounds like it's a very similar idea to what you're doing with your characters and like mapping out your characters.
Yeah.
Amy said, thanks. I didn't think these / your books would be inappropriate in any way. I just feel like she's a little bit younger for romance, which I'm finding in some bigger chapter books. That's a good point. I highly recommend More Than a Princess. And those two books.
I had when The Frog Princess first came out, I had a little girl from England write to me. She was 6 years old, and she said that The Frog Princess was the first proper book she'd ever read. Obviously, she was a very good reader if she was reading The Frog Princess, because that's a little older than 6, but 8 years old, Frog Princess. And next week, I'm going to read the first chapter of The Salamander Spell.
Perfect segue there. I was going to say that.
Here's the original cover of The Salamander Spell. And then when they reissued it, this was the newer cover. So
I like both of those covers, actually.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know that I've seen it.
Actually, Frog Princess came out first. And then I wrote a couple other books, Dragon's Breath, and I think, did I write Once Upon a Curse before this? And then I wrote The Salamander Spell, which is a prequel to The Frog Princess, but I thought we'd start with it because it begins the whole story.
I like that. I did not know that. Now I'm very excited to read that one as well. So a question from our friend Addison here. Do you have a new book coming out anytime soon? I've been reading a lot during this. I have also been writing a lot since we met.
Ooh.
Oh, yay!
Good. Let's hear that.
Oh, she said Salamander Spell was the first book she read from you.
Oh, wonderful.
Yay! So join us next week.
Yeah. Indeed. And think of questions.
Yes.
I wrote a book that is another fantasy. And as Liz was saying, I did a lot of revisions. It was 450 pages, and my agent said that was way too long. So she made me take out, eventually I took out 150 pages, so it's now 300. She's very happy with that. And she just sent it out, and she's chopping it around to various editors. So,
That's wonderful.
But it's not based on any other fairy tales. It's different from most of my other books. It's fantasy, but it's not based on anything else, really. And it's a new series. And I have a couple other books that I'm working on. And nothing's coming out very soon, but that'll be the next one to come out. But I have no idea when.
Here's a question, if you don't mind my asking or answering, and this is puts you on the spot. I realize I normally do this with other authors, and I think I forgot to ask you, what are you reading now?
What am I reading? Oh, gee, I think you would know.
I think I do know, but I don't want to. I mean, she's reading great books. I'll say that. I brought her some wonderful books. Yes, we've exchanged some great books by a very prolific author, which is exciting. So yes, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And we've been here for about half an hour, so I usually try to keep it around there, so we're not so everybody can get back to their schoolwork if they're taking a break. Or wrapping it up. And here in Maryland, it is gorgeous, gorgeous weather right now, at least in Northeast Maryland, I should say. So I also am excited to get outside. Not that I want to rush us, but I'm excited for Salamander's Spell next week, too. Now, knowing that it's a prequel. Prequels excite me for some reason. But again, all of Ms. Baker's books are available on our website, www.capricoastbooks.com. I can leave that in the comments, but you're welcome to purchase them there. Almost all of them should be signed already. And if not, I think it has a comment on there, I believe, if it's signed or not. But if you have a book already that you would like a signed book plate for, please just reach out. You can also email me. I'll put that information in the comments as well. And we have book plates, and I can send those off to you. And please join us next week. Number one, join us next week at 3:00 Wednesday. We'll be reading Salamander Spell. And please share with your friends. Think of your questions. I remember we asked 2 or 3 weeks ago for artwork. We really also want to see your artwork. I know Ms. E.D. Baker loves to see your artwork. All kinds of artwork. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to her books. I know she likes all art. And if you have any
names for shout outs.
Yes. Send your names for shout outs, send your comments, send your friends. We love it all. We really, I'm over here gesturing. I know my camera's not on, but we really love to see you all. And thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day. Enjoy this weather.
Stay safe. Bye.
Bye.